I'd like to start our discussion with a story. Let's build up the setting for the rest of the discussion. I'll be starting out with a summary first and foremost, for anyone not familiar with the story or who'd just like a brief refresher. Link wakes up from the Shrine of Resurrection after having seemingly slept for 100 years, unsure what it is he needs to do. He gets a new iPad, and meets up with a hang-gliding old man who agrees to give Link the sick-ass hang glider if he goes around collecting the 4 spirit orbs from the shrines in the Great Plateau. Link then goes around updating his iOS about as frequently as in real life, getting the spirit orbs from the monks in the shrines absorbed into his body and probably getting lung cancer before Thanos snapping the monks away.
I don't feel so good.
After then meeting the old man in the Temple of Time, he reveals himself to be the ghost of Christmas past, Hyrule's king, whose kingdom fell to Ganon's forces long ago. 100 years ago, they predicted the return of Ganon, because he's that asshole who always has a bone to pick. The people of Hyrule uncovered ancient weapons they decided would be worthwhile to reactivate and use as weapons against Ganon, as they were seemingly used as such in the past. The main discovery were the robots from the Incredibles, and the 4 divine beasts. Each beast was assigned a champion, each representing a different race from Hyrule. Ganon, however, Grand Theft Auto'd all the weapons meant to be used against him, killed the champions, and nearly killed Link. Link was brought to the Shrine of Resurrection, while Zelda held back Ganon's full power for the past 100 years while Link slept. After hearing this story, Link is tasked with defeating Ganon, saving Zelda, and restoring the land of Hyrule, and is advised to wrest control of the Divine Beasts away from Ganon to use against him. While advised to go to Kakariko Village, this is where the world truly opens up, and the player can really do whatever it is they want, such as in my case, launch into the castle at the speed of sound to immediately kill Ganon after being awake for nearly 24 hours straight and only having 3 days of practice to learn how to speedrun the game to fundraise for the Stollery Children's Hospital. Alright, maybe that's not an intended option by the developers, but point is, this is where the world opens. It is now your playground. If the player chooses to follow the story quests, they can unlock flashback memories to uncover the full story of the past, which includes Zelda desperately trying to unlock her power to defeat Ganon, but continuously being unable to do so, and being chastised and judged by those around her, except for Link. If the player frees the Divine Beasts from Ganon's control, Link frees the spirits of the champions, who resume their command on the beasts. After however much preparation and exploring time the player has taken, Link finally confronts Ganon, who escapes Zelda's control right as Link shows up, because how else would he have a final boss, really? Link defeats Ganon with a Bow of Light and saves Hyrule. That's the simple version of the plot summarized. There are some things I like throughout the story, but also several problems I have. One of the biggest problems is definitely about taking control of the Divine Beasts back. 100 years ago, Ganon sent out monsters that killed the champions and took over the Divine Beasts. Link restores control to the spirits of their original owners, sure, but why does that matter? What I mean is, why doesn't Ganon just take it over again? He did it once before, and while there were actual champions guarding it, some of the toughest of each of their races, and now there's literally nothing but a spooky ghost keeping each Divine Beast safe. Even if he can't send another Blight level of monster, if he got some random bokoblin to just stroll into the Divine Beast, what's a spooky ghost gonna do about it? He took all 4 Divine Beasts easily before. Why doesn't he just do it again, instead of letting himself get shot by 4 mega lasers like a complete idiot? But what if Ganon was just occupied with Zelda so he couldn't send anyone? The beasts were filled with monsters controlling it before Link showed up to them, so you'd think the guardians or monsters would be smart enough to just waltz up and take it again as it sits on whatever cliff it's on with a laser points at their master for probably months. Or what about during a blood moon when the monsters just spawn everywhere anyway? What are the champion spirits really gonna do about it? Just ask the monsters politely to leave? One thing I'm bummed about, but also kind of understand why it was done, is the absence of a Ganondorf. It would have been really neat to have had a figure as the antagonist actually speak to Link, share his thoughts about being held prisoner for the past 100 years by a princess who keeps being 17 for the past 100 years like Ash is just 10 forever. This used to be one of my bigger complaints, but after my game design classes at university, I think I feel a better appreciation for the choice to not do that. By not allowing Ganon to speak, to not take a human form, the game quite literally dehumanizes him. It strips him down to his pure malice and purpose in the plot as a purely evil creature. Through the dehumanization of Ganon, Breath of the Wild makes the argument that he is beyond redemption, that there is no reasoning with him, that he is simply a creature hell-bent on destruction. So while a Ganondorf would have been neat, on reflection it may have actually been better as it was. There's a few tidbits with the plot I definitely did enjoy, such as the fact that this game actually gave reasoning for Link being a silent protagonist, as revealed by some of Zelda's journal entries. Silent protagonists have become such a standard in the world of video games, so I find it fascinating when games like Fire Emblem Three Houses or Breath of the Wild actually give reasons for the silence, typically something important to the backstory of the protagonist. I also quite liked how the Spirit of the Sword from Skyward Sword does actually speak to Zelda for how to save Link's life, as a reminder that she's always with you through each of these adventures with the sword. For one criticism though, look, I know it's an easy target, but I have to mention it. How am I supposed to take characters seriously when 17-year-old Zelda is wearing pants probably tight enough to cut off blood flow? Yes, I know I play Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and that is one of my highest praised games ever, and it's something I'm on the fence about there as well, among other games. There's two sides to this argument. One side argues it's not exactly realistic wear, it's clearly put in to draw attention to. It doesn't serve any purpose towards the story, and really just detracts from it by creating what we may call a distraction, in what would be an otherwise serious scene. Well, you know what I mean.
Very potent effects under the proper circumstances. Ta-da!
It just makes something for the player to go, pfft, really? Let's flip to the other side though. Who cares if designs are unrealistic? But what does it actually mean to be unrealistic? I'm sure a giant malice pig monster is unrealistic. I'm sure an iPad that can start and stop time is unrealistic. I'm sure launching yourself across the world at the speed of sound is unrealistic. Well, I mean, that one's a glitch. One of the best ones in the game, actually. When assessing the realism of video games, or media in general, people will naturally target the social and cultural aspects of the media in question, and usually not the other aspects like the physical rules of the world. In my use of history in video games class, one of our key examples of this was Battlefield 1, where we watched a trailer that I frankly can't find again for this video, and were asked to identify what the main problem people at the time had with the trailer was. For those who've never touched a Battlefield game and don't know what Battlefield 1 is, it's a shooter that's set during the First World War. The problem people had with the trailer was that it depicted a woman fighting in the First World War, with people saying that by including a woman in World War I, that Battlefield had done away with all semblance of realism, as the professor then showed us a clip of somebody climbing into the plane's tailgunner seat as it flew by, climbing through the propeller. Our professor also then went on to prove that it's not that women did not participate in the history of World War I, it's that they were erased from it, and there were plenty of women who fought in the war. Point is, when judging realism in media, people will target the social and cultural aspects of it, whether it be a woman fighting in Battlefield 1, same-sex relationships in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or Zelda's inflatable pool floaty looking ass in Breath of the Wild, while other aspects such as the physical laws of the world or the media are typically just accepted instead of contested. In historical games such as Battlefield 1 or Assassin's Creed Odyssey, these kinds of criticisms stem from the perspective of historical accuracy, arguing that such a thing did not happen during those times, even though they did in both of those examples. But for a game set outside the history of our own world, why should that game follow what people expect to be cultural norms anyway? The world becomes a reflection of the art style and choices on the part of the developers for how they want their world to be shaped. Who are we to say they're not allowed to do it a certain way? For my own feelings on the matter towards character designs in Breath of the Wild, well, more like Zelda's design, I do feel it's unnecessary to have that part of her model be as much of a focus as it is. It makes it hard for me to take her character seriously. I won't say she looks unrealistic, and I just got through the argument on why that can't really be applied, but I do feel it's definitely off-putting to being able to see her character in a serious manner, but it's the developer's choice and reflection of artistic style. I'm sure it won't be the last game that makes it hard for me to take somebody seriously due to questionable design choices. Those were some smaller things I wanted to mention about the story, but now for my main arguments I want to make about the plot. The most intriguing part about Breath of the Wild's story is most of the actual story is before the story you're currently playing, having been 100 years ago. The story you're currently playing is Ganon fucked you up in the kingdom and all that, and he took our massive laser weapons like an asshole. Take them back and screw him up. If the player doesn't follow any of the story quests, that's all the story really becomes. It is up to the player's decision how much or little of the story they'll take in, by reclaiming the divine beasts and unlocking flashbacks to build up the backstory of this world. But there's no order to the divine beasts, and the memories can be done in any order even though there is a timeline of events, and this is all a consequence of it being an open world game. Let me explain. A story, by its nature, is an order of events. First A occurs, then B occurs, then C. There's an order to these events. You can't open a novel, flip to a random point in the story, then flip to another random page and keep reading. Almost always it won't fit together. So when you have a game like Breath of the Wild completely open the world to you and tell you, you know what? There's event A, event B, event C. You can do whatever you'd like. Of course the story would naturally fall apart to at least some degree. Stories are linear. Breath of the Wild by its nature is not linear, which results in a plot that, excluding the story before the events of the game, is abstracted down to get shooty lasers, fuck up Ganon. Non-linearity means a story finds itself cutting corners, like Zelda's been holding off Ganon for 100 years, please believe us, or you need the Bow of Light to defeat Ganon, here it is out of thin air randomly. Many problems I have with the story is because the developers had to form a story that could be experienced in whatever order due to the nature of the game itself. To me, the most important aspect of a game is the story and the music. It's what I'll think back on and be glad that I got to experience such an incredible journey. If the gameplay is good, then that's just a bonus. The strongest stories can be formed when they are linear, since that's how a story works after all, so my favorite games in general are typically linear ones. That isn't to say every game needs to have a linear and engaging story. Different games will focus on the three aspects of gameplay, story, and music in their own way, which in the case of Breath of the Wild I feel is an almost complete sole focus on the gameplay aspect. There's nothing inherently wrong about that, it's just not what I expect from a Zelda title. When it comes to linear stories, I really don't mind going through something like Skyward Sword as it spoon-feeds me plot bit by bit. I love good stories, I'll be like, yes, more please! I know some people really don't like linearity, but a story is linear by nature. Books and linearity go hand in hand. Movies and linearity go hand in hand. But video games and linearity don't always go hand in hand, meaning video games and storytelling don't always go hand in hand, making video games one of the trickiest and most fascinating facets for storytelling. It's because of this, and because of the personal impact a video game can have over other forms of storytelling, that I feel a plot in a video game can be one of the most difficult to nail a narrative in. If a completely open experience is offered to the player in a case such as Breath of the Wild, it's not impossible to form a story, but it needs to be handled in a different manner than storytelling in a linear game, and there exist consequences when not handled properly. For example, all the champions felt to me like they had one or two personality traits and no real depth to them, except Mipha, you get the clear. Daruk just kinda felt like a tough guardian type character, same with Urbosa honestly, and that ain't Falco was just an asshole.
How about up there?
And because the divine beasts could be done in any order, you couldn't exactly have somebody along with you to really connect with on your adventure who's also imperative to the plot, Midna being a strong example of that.